Now let's dive into our foundational discussion of Ishmael. As many of you are probably already aware, Ishmael is understood as the first son of Abram or Abraham. And so even though he is not the one who inherited all of the rights of the firstborn, he is indeed indicated as the firstborn. His mother was Egyptian. And so in terms of matrilineal descent, Ishmael is Egyptian. Accordingly, Ishmael is associated with a number of dynamics related to Egypt, and we're going to check those out. In fact, we're going to be looking at some of the name dynamics related to Ishmael, the obscurity of Ishmael, because Ishmael is very esoteric. Ishmael is obscured. Ishmael is only mentioned 48 times in Scripture in terms of the Old Testament. But there are a number of dynamics related to Ishmael and this situation where there is a play on words. Surprise, surprise. Okay. Ishmael is also related to Mesopotamia and Babylon. And so there is an intimate connection between Ishmael and a Babylonian deity, and also, of course, Set, the Egyptian deity. When we look at the history of Ishmael and these narratives related to Ishmael, we find a number of correlations. One interesting correlation is that Ishmael is associated with this word Mes, M-E-S. You might also see M-E-S-O, indicating two things. In one instance, Mes or Meso refers to something that's in the middle. And so you might think of Mesoamerica or Mesopotamia. But it also indicates this idea of error or wrong. Notably, Ishmael is associated with this name, Mesla, either I-Mesla or E-Mesla. And we're going to look at the significance of this. As indicated before, it's very difficult to get significant information related to this MESLAMTAEA or MESLAMTAEA. But this is the name of a Babylonian deity. This deity is associated with Mesopotamia. Another name for this deity is Meslam, Meslam, and Mesu, associated with the Mesu or Misu tree. And so we're going to also look at the significance of that. Now, hopefully by now you've taken some time to look into some of the deities that were mentioned in a previous discussion associated with Nergal. And we've, of course, talked about Nergal a couple of times now. What's interesting about this Mesu is that it's related to that MESLAMTAEA, that deity. And that deity's name is associated with this idea of he who comes from Meslam, or he who comes from Mesu, or related to this luxuriant Mesu or Misu tree. Now, when researching this tree is also understood as the Ceylon ironwood tree coming out of the Indo-Malayan area. We also find historically that Ishmael is associated with Saracens, that construct of Saracen. However, it's sort of misleading because there is an association between Saracen and Abraham's wife, Sara. And that name has a couple of meanings, but the meaning that is put out front is usually the one about her being royalty, being a princess, being a ruler. There's another construct that goes along with that name, and it takes you in a totally different direction with respect to understanding who Sarah was. And it also takes you in a very different direction in terms of understanding what a Saracen happened to be. And so, of course, because Ishmael is not considered the son of Sarah, this creates a little bit of confusion. But once you understand what Sarah means, the fullness of this name, it makes perfect sense. And what also comes up is you start to see more clearly why Ishmael is, just like many others, a Set proxy. And so what we find when really deconstructing Ishmael is that Ishmael really is presented as a deity associated with this Meslam or MESLAMTAEA deity. He is also associated with that name, a king, also associated with Nimrod, a place and a people, and of course that tree that we were talking about. And so Ishmael in many ways is yet another one of these hidden ones. And when you deconstruct his name along with all of these correlations, you see that Ishmael is leading you right back to Set. Now this is interesting, of course, because Ishmael is Egyptian and Set is an Egyptian deity. Remember, the primordial Egyptian deity. Now, we're not going to go in depth in terms of that name Sarah right now, but suffice it to say that the other understanding of Sarah is this idea of contending, competing, opposing, fighting, discord, rebellion, combat, wrestling, battling, and attacking. In other words, Ishmael, when looking at the totality of the narrative and the name and the correlations, Ishmael is another way of understanding war. And that's another reason why Ishmael is associated with this Nergal entity and also Set. And all of these entities appear to be simple stand-ins for Set yet again. Now, what's interesting is this name that is one of the transliterations of Ishmael, this Meslam. It is found primarily in Egypt, and it has the highest density in Egypt, followed by Nigeria, and then it drops down significantly in Indonesia, and then the United Arab Emirates. Now, what's also interesting in terms of translations is that in doing the translation of this MESLAMTAEA or Te'a, what it's translating as is first it's detecting as Arabic, and then it's translating into the English as my Muslim or Muslim. Now I'm going to break it down so that you can see it when it's separated out. And so you see this breakdown here where the words are separated out. And so you see that MESLAMTAEA or Ta'e. It's hard to know exactly how that word is pronounced, but at any rate, it's translating into the English when it's separated in this way, and with Meslam separated in this way as my Muslima, referring to Muslim woman, my Muslim woman. And this might be related to the A at the end of the word. And the word, this actually might be two names, by the way. And so that EA may be a name all by itself, and then the MESLAMTA, another word all by itself. And of course, MESLAM is its own word. And here you see it separated out again, and you see my Muslima and then Muslim. And so this MESLAMTAEA, which is the name of a deity, is translating out of the Arabic into the English as variations of Muslim, whether it's female or Muslim in general. And this is part of what takes us right back into that whole construct of Saracen, coming out of Sar, coming out of Sara. And the way this is taking place is there is a letter interchange. And it looks insignificant on the surface, but it's significant because when you don't know about that letter interchange, you don't know that there is another meaning for Sar and that there is another meaning for Sarah. An interesting notation is that when going from the English into the Arabic, the H is missing. And so you see the ISH in the English, but in the Arabic, it is simply IS. It's really interesting that uh, the consolation prize for both Ishmael and Esau, the prize involves being heard. Okay, so according to these traditional narratives, but what we're going to see is that there's a little bit more going on with Ishmael's name than God hears. And the way that you find this out is you go back in the etymology. This is trying to take you forward in etymology and taking things out of order so that it provides a narrative that's inconsistent with the actual etymology history. And here you see this purported breakdown of Ishmael being Shama and El. But is that really what's going on with this name? Now, of course, that appears to be part of it because you do see that Ishma. And so the Shama does seem to go along with that. And of course, the El, indicating God, is at the end. But there's something else going on with this, and we're going to look back at that. Another interesting dynamic is that this name belongs to 5 Israelites. Yes, 5 of them. And so the question comes up about when we see these narratives, are we always clear that we are looking at Ishmael, Abraham's oldest son, or when we are hearing historical narratives, are we looking at Ishmael, one of Jacob's sons or grandsons? And so what are we really looking at when we see this name, Ishmael? In order to understand how Ishmael is related to MESLAMTAEA or Nergal, we have to look very closely at the etymology of Ishmael. And here you can see some of that. If you look down below, what you see is that YIS and then the MAEL. But you also see that one pronunciation is Yishmael. And you see the Yishma separated from the L. And that is the construct of consideration right now. And so while the Strong's is leading you to Shama in terms of the etymology, right before you get to Ishmael in terms of etymology, in Strong's 3457, you find the Yishma that we just noted. So we saw Yishma and then El. Now, Yishma is not the same as Shama. And so when you go back in terms of the etymology to this Yishma, what you find is the first part of Ishmael's name is desolate. Here, however, it's indicated as a man of Judah. Now, it's also important to keep in mind that that EL is at the end. And so what we have here is not God hears, but what we have here is God of desolation. And so here you see that this is taking you to yet another construct, which is this yasham. But again, it's indicating that this Yishma, which is the first part of Yishmael or Ishmael's name, is indicating this construct of desolate, and also indicating that this is a man of Judah. Yes, Judah, Judah, or however you choose to spell that particular name. And of course, what do we see at 3456 for this Yasham? We see to be desolate. So that Yishma is about desolation. And so this, of course, is some sort of running theme that is going through these Abrahamic narratives. It goes on to indicate that this Yasham or Yasam is to be appalled, desolate, and stripped. And here we see this action taking place with respect to this name. So a verb dynamic related to this name, to not only be desolate, but to lay waste. Now this is where it gets particularly interesting. So we go back to this Yasam, that this Yishma is leading us to, and what do we have? Yes, 3455. Be put, set. By now you already know how the story goes. Be put, to place, to be placed. Okay, so we have the same dynamic going on yet again with these names leading right back to set. It just takes actually going on the journey to get there. But most of the time we don't even know that the journey is there or the journey should be even taken, because we are being led in a different direction so that we don't always see set. And of course, we are led to this construct sum or sim. We've been here before, okay? And it indicates to put, place, set yet again. But again, remember that this is also related to the construct of Shem or Sem. It's the same thing. It's really interesting to note that in First Chronicles, Ishmael is in a sequence that includes Jezreel. You might want to take some time and do a little research on Jezreel. As we wrap this up, there are a couple of interesting notations here related to place names and Ishmael. The first notation is when Ishmael is spelled the way it's spelled, coming out of the Arabic in terms of the pronunciation, and even coming out of the Hebrew in many instances. There are a number of places named Ishmael or Ismael or Ismael. There are 4 places named Ishmael in Turkey. So Turkey has the largest number of places named Ishmael, followed by Pakistan, Russia, the Ukraine, Greece, Bulgaria, and Afghanistan. And there is one place that has the English spelling of Ishmael. Let's look at that. And so while this name doesn't exist anymore, it's a ghost town at this point, the place still stands. And so there was a place called Ishmael in the United States, in America, and it was located in Missouri. Now, as we wrap this up, we see that there are these dynamics wherein you have words that mean opposite things. And Ishmael is just another one of these names, another one of these constructions, because Ishmael is supposed to be associated with this idea of perfection and this idea of peace and wholeness. However, when you really deconstruct Ishmael, what you find is that this name is associated with the opposite. And those who are considered the descendants of Ishmael are associated with this name Saracen, that is not really about the woman Sarah, it's about the construct of Sara. And that gives this idea of Saracen or Ishmael another meaning. And that meaning is associated with war and destruction and desolation. As we wrap this up, I'm just going to make an observation about a almost universal human dynamic, wherein many individuals will often pray for the destruction of what they understand to be their enemies. And when people pray for destruction, people pray for desolation, that's what they are invoking, and that's what they are putting forth out there into the world. And also what they are doing is calling forth all of these deities of destruction and desolation. And so they are calling forth all of this negativity and adversity into the world, in many instances believing that it is going to serve as sort of a protective force. There is, I will offer you, another way perhaps to approach this. And so this is just something to consider. Instead of praying for destruction and devastation and destruction, perhaps one might want to focus on self. And so that destruction, devastation stuff, that is usually directed outward, not toward the self. But perhaps individuals might think about turning the prayer around so that the prayer is focused on self and might accomplish some of the same things that they are looking for with the other prayer. But perhaps the focus might better be on peace, provision, and protection. Why don't you spend some time meditating on that, researching those words, researching those constructs, and see if that might be a better energy to put forth into the world. If that might be a prayer that's a little bit more beneficial for you as an individual living in this world that is full of devastation and destruction and desolation already.